Well, somehow the parking lot got mixed up with the farmer's little strip behind the barn and ultralight aircraft, and I flew for 2.5 hours that day. And to look down to see an empty wheelchair was without question the best therapy that could have happened to that. Hello, I'm R.H. Thompson, and welcome to Man Alive. Craft of the air, beautiful. Dreams, myth, practicality, all rolled into one. Tonight's program is about a voyager, a flyer. In cultures around the world, many of the archetypal heroes are voyagers. They journey, they travel to the edge of the known world, to the edge of human experience, and then they take a step beyond. Then they return to us and they tell us what it was like, and they tell us to have courage. They pathfind. And in doing so, these heroes expand our world. Carl Hiebert is a middle-aged man from Ontario, and although he's regarded as a common fellow by his friends, they also realize that he has expanded the possibility for their own lives. Carl is a flyer, and the wings of his ultralight are his legs. Years ago, an accident left his lower body paralyzed, so he replaced it with the wings of an aircraft. The loss of his physical freedom became a greater freedom. In our imagination, flight is a release from the earth, a release from our earthbound bondage. Alone in the sky, Carl relishes his freedom, and what he brings back to us are his visions from above.
Carl now, he's done some amazing things. He's a very significant person. He's a very ordinary person. And it's an encouragement to be able to know that it doesn't take an exceptional person, but it takes an ordinary person to apply to a dream and to be willing to dream and stretch not only himself, but those around him, either from up on high, but just even from where you are. You can do something significant by stretching. And this is why we love this guy.
I was born in a little Mennonite farming community called Port Rowan, near a place called Long Point. Well, it's interesting. You come back to your home stomping grounds and how specific scenes trigger specific memories that you thought were long since forgotten. I was born here the year that my parents moved here in 1947. And in hindsight, realized it was probably a pretty ideal place to be. A real sense of community, both in terms of the immediate family, a family of 8 children, but beyond that, a huge family of aunts and uncles, cousins, and then the whole church community that would assemble on a regular basis.
By the teen years, this safe and caring world began to feel restrictive. It was time to push the boundaries, to explore what lay beyond. This made Carl the black sheep of the family, but not because what he did was wild or crazy. He needed to gain a sense of who he was and what life was all about. He wanted a taste of adventure.
Okay, good. All set? Yep. Mm-hmm.
Carl fell in love with flying one summer evening when he was 15. The owner of the local lumber yard, George Backus, took him up in a small J4 Piper Cub. When they were only about 200 feet above the big creek where Carl used to canoe and swim as a kid, they recognized 2 people in boats below. George banked the plane, opened the door, and they waved and yelled down. For Carl, making that connection from the top down was a magic moment. He was hooked on flying and wouldn't let go.
The visual part of it, the aerial photography, happened years later when I started hang gliding.
was intrigued with the idea of being able to see the barn roof or a silo. I could see the symmetry of corn rows in the field, or I could see a freighter passing by in Lake Erie. So I think the idea of flying as a means of being able to continue to do that was the fascination.
Hang gliding was Carl's ultimate sport. In less than 2 years, he went from his first lesson to the Canadian National Hang Gliding Championships.
Probably the most dramatic 30 seconds of my life happened September the 12th, 1981. As the instructor, I was the first one to launch to test the wind conditions, to see how gusty, how steady the winds were. And just as I ran off the hill, a gust of wind caught the glider, the left wingtip dropped down, clipped the top of a little sumac bush about 5 feet high, causing the glider to veer back towards the hill.
I started running towards him because thinking that there was something wrong. And when I got underneath the glider to where he was having trouble speaking, and he said, "Alan, I can't move my legs." And I looked, and his legs were seemed to be all tangled up in his cocoon, which is part of the harness, and sort of at a really awkward angle. And I thought, gee, he's broken his legs. How could he have possibly have done this with such a slight mishap? And I said, "Carl, it looks like you've broken your legs. And how could you have done that with such a, And he said, "Alan, I think it's a lot more serious than that." He says, "I can't feel anything."
Jerry and I went up to the hospital, and I mean, as soon as we went in the room, you could pretty much tell what the situation was. And it was quite devastating, but he was handling it very well. But of course, I think he was in sort of an emotional shock too. And people were coming in and out all day, and he was just talking with them, and he wasn't crying, or he wasn't, as I can remember, he wasn't hysterical, or he wasn't terribly emotional. He was just talking about it more than anything.
Carl had crushed the T7, T8 vertebrae in his back. He was now a paraplegic.
The biggest fear for me was not the limitations of the wheelchair, but it was what happened to my world of friends. In fact, no, most of those friendships became more meaningful. A few drifted off, but more significantly was the fact that other friendships became much more entrenched to what we were able to share together.
On a beautiful Saturday afternoon, a friend came to visit at the hospital, suggested we go outside to the parking lot for some fresh air. At least that's what we told the nurses. Well, somehow the parking lot got mixed up with the farmer's little strip behind the barn, an ultralight aircraft, and I flew for 2.5 hours that day. And to look down to see an empty wheelchair was, without question, the best therapy that could have happened. A realization that even if I couldn't walk, I could still fly, and that was my gift of being able to get back in the sky again.
Carl did his first cross-country flight with a friend shortly after the accident. The 12 miles from Elmira to Guelph seemed like a pretty major undertaking at the time, but cruising over the late October cornfield triggered a much bigger dream: to fly the 5,000 miles across Canada. It took 5 years for that dream to become a reality.
But in 1986, as a part of Expo, flew an ultralight from Halifax all the way to Vancouver. Mostly because it was a challenge, the fact that it hadn't been done before, and probably at some level was a means for me, even though I was now in a wheelchair, to establish who I was and what I could do in this life, despite the limitations.
The flight was a real team effort. 18 friends gave up their summer holidays to join in a 2-month adventure crossing Canada, supporting Carl as he flew the distance.
Having traveled some 50,000 miles, that was the first time I began to have a sense of what it meant to me to be a Canadian. Having now twice flown across Canada and seen it from that unique aerial vantage point, and realized that how rich our terrain is, how varied our geographic fabric is, should be a healthy starting point to appreciate what a beautiful country we live in.
For Carl, landing in Vancouver was an anticlimax. He realized the joy in life was not in reaching the destination, but in the journey itself. In fact, when he was about 20 miles outside of Vancouver, he was tempted to do a 180-degree turn and head back into the mountains to soar and play among the snow-capped peaks, because it was the flying itself that was the fascination. The journey ended with a perfect float landing in English Bay and a short taxi up to the expo site.
Probably what struck me with the greatest force was the realization that we all are capable of setting out on what initially might be simple dreams, but if we nurture those dreams, pay attention to them, support them with the necessary effort, I think we're all capable of reaching much further than we've done in the past. I think all of us have a lot more God-given potential than we typically give credit to, but we never take the time to discover that. So it was a profound learning curve for me to realize that life, I think, really should be a series of ongoing new challenges. Helen Keller said it well when she said life is either daring adventure or nothing, but it's what we choose to make it. Hi, Tony.
Hi, how are you?
Where are you from?
I'm Windsor.
Windsor.
Can you just make this happy birthday to Lisa?
Carl flew across Canada again in 1993-94, this time to photograph the country from the unique perspective of an ultralight. He took 14,000 pictures, which he distilled down to the almost 130 images that make up Gift of Wings, a celebration of Canada which sold more than 20,000 copies in its first year. He flew on behalf of the Canadian Paraplegic Association, raising over $100,000 towards the goal of making the wheelchair into a museum piece. "15 years ago, Carl taught Perry Weber and his father Ed, farmers in Elmira, Ontario, to fly ultralights. They joined the wide circle of Carl's friends, with whom he shares his exuberance for flight and the wondrous perspective it gives him. Carl takes off from a cornfield on the farm, not far from the hangar where he keeps his ultralight.
I'm 15 minutes from my house. I can come out here, have my own gas tank, gas up, pre-flight the aircraft, and be gone in 15 minutes. And I'm completely independent, and to me, it's a joy in itself. So my years flying gets packed into about 3 or 4 months of the summer, so I take advantage of most days when it's good and flyable like this.
You experience the world differently from the open cockpit of an ultralight. These small, light airplanes fly lower to the ground and much slower than regular aircraft. You can feel the temperature drop as you climb and smell the barns and hayfields below.
Aside from the very narrow windshield, I have a completely open view, and it really is a three-dimensional motorcycle of the skies, and that's what makes it all worthwhile.
Waterloo County, within 5 miles of Carl's takeoff point, has some of the most stunning farmland anywhere in Canada. This is because of the very diversified farming practices of the Old Order Mennonites, a group of about 4,000 who plant 4 or 5 different crops on a 100-acre farm, as opposed to the huge single crops of corn and soybeans that are more commonly seen in Canadian farmland. It's an aerial photographer's delight.
Intriguing because visually it's so rich there. It's a different way of being, horse and buggies for transportation, the black dress code, but that's the surface, and I've had an inherent curiosity of what lies underneath all that.
About 10 years ago, Carl began spending time in the community, hoping to photograph this unique world. The challenge was to build a relationship of trust, as the camera is forbidden. Gradually, mutual respect and admiration grew.
How are you, Carl?
Howdy today.
Not too bad.
Picked a good day for it.
Oh, pardon?
You picked a great day for it.
Yeah.
Carl can now visit old order farms, schools, and gathering places to take pictures. It is a rarely granted privilege.
Some days, for example, I'll spend a half day without getting the camera out of the bag. It's just time with the children themselves.
Do I have to go now?
It's an attempt to go back and maybe relearn a bit about my own childhood and what constitutes a healthy, balanced way of being as children. I look at these children who don't have the high-tech toys, who don't have television, who don't have organized sports and activity, and yet their faces radiate a joy and delight that I don't find in much of our mainstream society. I'm saying, where does that come from within the context of all that simplicity? It's a joy and a delight that is in the smiles. You look at some of these images, they're not superficial smiles, they're smiles that come from the core. And it's a healthy way of being.
Your item? Really?
Mennonite values have anchored Carl throughout his life. He shares this heritage with his closest childhood friend, Paul Petker.
I think as we consider Carl now, he's done some amazing things. He's a very significant person. But I think the encouragement that I take from him and from evaluating where he's come from and what he's done, he's a very ordinary person. And it's an encouragement to me to be able to know that it doesn't take an exceptional person, but it takes an ordinary person to apply to a dream and to be willing to dream and stretch not only himself but those around him. You can be a young person or an adult, but he'll just encourage you to stretch and enjoy and see things from a different perspective, either from up on high, but just even from where you are, you can do something significant by stretching. And this is why we love this guy.
God is great and God is good.
Our family still gets together on occasion. I have two sisters living in southern Manitoba. In fact, we were together for the occasion of my kid brother's 25th wedding anniversary. So my two sisters and their husbands flew out, some nieces and nephews, and we were quite a crowd by the time we all got together. At this point, we're old enough we were able to start reflecting back and doing some visiting on memory lane, and it's fun to be able to do that.
Well, you still do a fair amount of cutting, right, for your fuel supply for the house.
Carl is probably closest to his second oldest brother, Henry, who still farms near the original family farmstead in Port Rowan.
Trying to keep up to it from one year to the next.
When I look back at my childhood, I realize they were excellent training years for later in life. Certainly, when I had my accident and when in a fraction of a sec my whole life took a radical change in direction, and within 15, 20 seconds I was able to face that opportunity with a positive perspective, I realized in reflecting on that ability to look on that positively and see it as a challenge came out of my childhood.
Yeah, there was always a good balance of the playthings, right?
Yeah.
In terms of, sure, worked hard, but also had the capacity to play.
And it didn't have to be fancy things. Like, we got a lot of enjoyment on it, just ordinary things.
Yeah.
School was probably the best 4 years of my life. For the first 4 years, because I went to a red brick school, I was the 8 grades under one roof. Didn't learn a lot, but had a great time. It was probably the best learning that could have come out of a situation like that.
Amazing, that's 42 years old. 42 years ago that was put in there.
There was a turning point in my friendship with Carl. It was about 4 years ago. And we were flying. We were at an airstrip not very far from here. We took off and we danced through the skies the way we so often do when he's flying, because he's totally one with the machine. There was no separation between him and the aircraft. I remember this tremendous sense of elation I had. It was almost an out-of-body experience. I just forgot where I was, and we were just totally one with the air and the skies. We came back down, we landed. I hopped out of the glider. I was just wowed beyond belief. And I started to race back towards the car. And I remember Carl yelling back, "Alan, where are you going?" I had forgotten that he needed a wheelchair to get from the aircraft to the car. I had totally forgotten the man was in a wheelchair. And that's what his flying does. It releases him from that, and it released me from my perception of him. I no longer saw the wheelchair anymore. And I don't to this day. I see only the man, and that's a beautiful thing.